All right, there are two other important American writers that I want you to know about. And the first one of those is named August Wilson. Now, August Wilson is an African American writer that wrote a series of plays that's called the Pittsburgh Cycle because they all take place in Pittsburgh. And he's like got one that's set in the 30s and one that's set in the 40s and one that's set in the 50s and one that's set in the 60s, like that. Most of the characters are not related. I think there's only one character that shows up in two different plays. They're mostly, though, not related to each other, other than the fact that they're all about Black people living in Pittsburgh. And the one that I want, and they're brilliant plays. All of them are really, really good plays. They've won Pulitzer Prize and Tony Awards and stuff like this. And the one that I want you to know about is called Fences.
So the main character in Fences is this man named Troy. Troy is a black man. He lives in Pittsburgh, and he is a garbage collector. And like most of like all of the garbage collectors, the black garbage collectors in Pittsburgh, he is a guy that lifts the cans. And that becomes important a little later. Troy lives with his wife Rose and his son Corey, their son Corey, and also his brother Gabriel. Now Gabriel was in the war and got injured in his head, and so he has he's a little bit nuts. But anyway, he's there as well. And in the beginning of the play, we have Troy, and he's meeting with his friend Bono. Let's do this guy for Bono, and they are talking about how they're both garbage men, and they both are barrel lifters. And Troy talks about how he went to their boss, Mr. Rand, and basically asked him, hey, how come all of the colored people that work here are all lifting barrels? We're not, none of us are drivers. And the guy, Mr. Rand, basically says, oh, gee, I never even occurred to me. You know what, let's change that. Let's make you be one of the drivers. And so he's kind of breaking a color barrier, and now he's the guy that's driving the truck. Now, on the surface, this makes him seem like he's some kind of like a racial hero. But what it comes out is that he's not doing this really as a way to kind of break out and get freedom for his people so much as because, well, he doesn't really want to keep lifting barrels. And he'd rather be able to drive the truck, and especially he wants to drive the truck because he wants to then decide the route they take so that he can take his lunch break at the time when he can go see his mistress. He has a mistress that Rose obviously doesn't know about, and so he's setting this up. So Troy right away is established as this character that's like, he's not a good guy, he's not a bad guy. He's kind of just a guy with faults and also with positive things. Anyway, though, the main conflict comes eventually between Troy and Corey. Because, see, Corey is a football player. He's in high school, and he's a football player, and he has a chance to be able to go and get a scholarship to play football, college football. But Troy doesn't believe it's possible. Because he says, no, I remember when I was young, I was a great baseball player. But I couldn't get anywhere because I was black. And because I was black, they wouldn't let me be able to go anywhere. And so the same thing's going to happen to you. They're going to build up your whole, they're going to build up your hopes and dreams, and then it won't go anywhere. You need to stop wearing a football and get yourself a real job. And Corey just doesn't like this, how his father keeps on just kind of pushing him down. And eventually, what he starts saying is that, no, Dad, it wasn't that you were black, it's that you were old. No, I was plenty young. It was because I was black. They wouldn't let me get anywhere. It wasn't because you were black, Dad. It's because you were too old. But Troy doesn't believe that, and which of them is right is never really established because neither one of them will back down. But anyway, what it turns out is that, and this happens off stage, but Troy basically goes to Corey's coach and tells him, yeah, my son's not playing football anymore. Because he wants to kind of force Corey off the team so that he can get a real job, because he thinks he's basically giving him tough love because he's not going to go anywhere with his football, so he wants him to get a real job. Now this happens right before a big game where there's supposed to be college scouts there and stuff like this. And so of course Corey is very, very upset about this. He's very angry at Troy, yells and shouts at him, they get into a big fight, and eventually Troy basically kicks him out of the house. He goes off to the military. Meantime, remember I mentioned about him having a mistress. So that woman gets pregnant, and that's when Rose finds out about it. He has to tell her, basically, that, you know, so I have a mistress, and she has she's having a baby, and so that's the thing we need to deal with. And she's like, no, this is awful, get out of the house. She kicks him out of the house. He comes back with the baby in the next scene, and basically tells him, my mistress died in childbirth. I can't raise this child. Will you please help me? Rose takes the baby and says, this baby has a mother, but you do not have a woman anymore. So you can come in and live with us, but everything between us is over now. But I will raise this child. Fast forward about 7 years. About 7 years later, and Troy is now dead. Troy has died. Corey comes home again. This is basically the last act. He's coming home to see his mother and to kind of comfort her because her husband is dead, but he has no desire to go to the funeral. And his mom is trying to convince him, no, you need to go to the funeral. You need to go to your father's funeral. Like, no, I'm still angry at him. I still don't forgive him for what he did. He ruined my life. I could have been a football player. I could have made a great life, and he ruined it, and so I ended up having to go off to the military. And his mother can't convince him. At one point, he runs into his sister, which he's never really known very much. She's a little girl now. She's like 6 or something like this. And he talks to her, and she has nothing but good things to say about her dad. Her dad was this wonderful hero that was always kind and always nice. So from her point of view, Troy was a great man. And it's neat how, like, she can see him as a great hero. Corey can see him as this guy that ruined their lives. Rose can see him as this guy that cheated on her, but also the guy that raised these children. He's kind of in the middle. He's not good and he's not bad. And eventually, that's kind of the final statement that as Corey still thinks she doesn't want to go to this funeral, and Rose says to him basically, your father wasn't a hero, but he was a man. And that needs to be honored. He was your father. It doesn't matter if he wasn't perfect. You need to honor him. And so he does, and he goes to his funeral. And that's kind of the end of the play. We're left with this kind of, who is this man? You know, he's not a good man. He's not a villain. He's kind of somewhere in the middle. And that really is a big difference between Fences and a lot of plays before that had dealt with African American before that, including Erasing the Sun. Erasing the Sun, Walter makes some mistakes, but he's basically a good man. Troy, it's harder to see that. It's harder to see whether he's a good man or a bad man, which I think honestly makes August Wilson a lot more interesting to watch, because his characters are human. He doesn't create the idea that because they're black, they're persecuted, and so they're terrible, and so we should feel bad for them, or we should honor them. Instead, he says, no, he's a person with a lot of flaws and a lot of good. And you can't just kind of pigeonhole a person as being one thing or another. Anyway, though, that's Fences.
That's Fences, and that's August Wilson. Now, the next guy actually is a lot older than the other ones. Thornton Wilder wrote a lot closer to the beginning of the 1900s. But his plays, well, one play, in fact, that he wrote is still very well regarded, and it's extremely good. And I would love to be able to do it in our auditorium one of these days. It's called Our Town.
So Our Town was written at a time when most of America was living in small towns. Now most of America lives in cities, but during the time he wrote this, most of America was living in small towns. And the play was very much meant to be a kind of microcosm of America. Like everything that happened in this town could have happened anywhere in America. And that's kind of what he's shooting for, is to try to give people an idea, this is what American life is like. The main characters in Our Town are two children. They begin as children. Their names are Emily Webb and George Gibbs. But they are not the first character you see. The first character you see is named the stage manager, which is a very unusual, very meta thing that was done way before that breaking the fourth wall thing was normal. The stage manager comes out and talks to the audience and basically tells them, we're putting on this play as a way to remember our town of Grover's Corners. We're going to put this play in a time capsule, and then sometime in the future they will look it up. So let's tell us about who we are. And the first act is called Daily Life. You know that because the stage manager tells us so. And the stage manager introduces you to all the people in the town, the important people in the town and stuff like that. And along the way, you also meet Emily and George and their children. And you can kind of tell that they both kind of like each other. They both kind of feel for each other, but they're both very shy about it because they're, 7 or something like this. But you kind of get the sense that they got a little crush on each other, which is cute and all that sort of thing. And then at the end of the act, the stage manager says, that's 10-minute intermission. Go outside and smoke if you need to. And that's the end of the first act. The second act is called Love and Marriage. In the second act, it starts out with these two being old enough that they are getting married now. And as they're getting ready for their, it's like the morning of their marriage. And they're both excited and a little bit scared. And the stage manager says, all right, well, let's go back and see how this happened. And it goes back and shows them how they went from, just being two friends to how they decided to start dating and how they kind of decided that they were going to live together and forever and ever. And it's a really beautiful moment. The stage manager says some really impressive things. Like he says, most people in Grover's Corners climb into their graves married. Which is a really wonderful way of putting it, that most people get married, which was the case in 1910 when this was written. Most people got married. Maybe it took them a long time, maybe it took them right away when they were young, but most people got married. And they continue telling you about the love and marriage thing, and they're getting married, and as they're trying to get married, right as they're both getting ready, they each individually have a little moment of cold feet, where Emily goes to her father and says, Dad, I just don't know. I don't know if I can do this. And her father encourages her so that she won't be afraid. And at the same time, George goes to his mother and says, I don't want anyone else to be my girl. Just you. You're my mommy. That's who I want to be. And she encourages him as well. And then the two of them come together and they do love each other. And they get married and they kiss. And then they walk down the aisle through the theater, through the audience and stuff like that. And the stage manager again says, there's another 10-minute intermission, go outside if you need to. And that's the end of that act. So far, everything has been just kind of daily life, love and marriage, normal stuff. And then we reach the third act. The third act starts with a funeral. And the stage manager, as you're seeing all these people with umbrellas on the stage, which I think might be where the idea of funerals with umbrellas all the time, which you see that all over TV now. I think it started in this play. And the stage manager shows you the graveyard. And in the graveyard, there's a lot of people just kind of sitting there on chairs looking at the audience. And he introduces them as if this is where the dead sit. The dead are sitting and watching the rest of you. And there's this, as I said, there's this funeral going on over there, and out of the funeral suddenly steps Emily, who comes over, looks very shyly at the dead, and sits down beside them. And we find out that she has died in childbirth, having a baby. And as they sit around talking for a minute, and the dead don't look at her. They only look straight ahead, and they say that they're here to try to kind of forget their lives. And she says, but I could go back, couldn't I? I could go back and relive part of my life. I can feel it in my heart. And one of them, this is actually is George's mother, says, you don't want to do that. It won't be what you think it is. She says, but I've got to go back. I want to go back and live through it again. And she says, I'll choose the day of my wedding or something. She says, no. If you got to do it, choose the most unimportant day you can think of. It'll be important enough. And so she goes back to a birthday. She goes back to her birthday when she's like, 6 or something like this. And she goes through the day, and like her mom is there, and her mom, I'm going to use this as the same mom, and her mom just treats it like it's an ordinary, everyday sort of thing. And Emily's just like, no, look at me, but look at me. Let me take a look at each other. Oh, things have changed so much. And for her, everything is important now. But for her mom, this is just an ordinary day. This is just breakfast. And she has several moments like that where she thinks, this is very important. This is my last time to be able to see these things. And I haven't seen this in so long, and I miss them. But for the people that are there, it's just an ordinary Thursday. And the last thing that happens is she remembers that George was going to come over to wish her a happy birthday back when she was 6. She says, oh, I can't bear to see him like this and have him act like it's no big deal for him to see me. She says, take me back to the dead. And she goes back to sit with the dead again. And she says, one more time though, let me take one more look out there. And she looks out at the world and she says, goodbye to waking up in the morning and sunshine and coffee and little things like this, little beautiful things that she never appreciated when she was alive. And then she turns to the stage manager and she says, is there anyone that appreciates how wonderful life is while they're living it? And the stage manager answers, nobody. The saints and the poets, they do some. And then she comes back and she sits down beside all the other dead. And in the middle of as the play is about to end, and they're all just kind of talking quietly and looking out at the audience like that, in comes George. And George is heartbroken because his wife just died, And he goes over to her gravestone, and he can't see her, but she can see him. And he falls down on her gravestone and just starts crying. And all she can do is sit there looking at him. And she says to his mother sitting beside her, the living don't understand, do they? And the mother says, no, they don't understand. And that's the end of the play. So that's Our Town by Thornton Wilder. It is a brilliant play. If you ever have a chance to see it, do. It is just so gorgeous, such a gorgeous piece. And this is the end of our unit on theater history in Theater Arts 2. So our last discussion for this, I want you to look over all the different plays that we talked about and think about one that stuck in your head as, wow, that was interesting. Wow, I would love to read that. I'd love to see it. I'd love maybe to act in that play. Tell me about that one down below. Tell me the one that stuck in your head as something that sounded really interesting and cool. And then tell me why that one struck you as interesting. And don't forget, we are going to have the test coming up on this soon, so make sure you go through your notes and be ready for it. And we will finish that up later. Have a great day.